I heard it with my own ears. A question, sharp and clean as the edge of a new knife, slicing through the murmur of the backyard party. I just don't get it, the voice said, a familiar, well-manicured alto that belonged to my son's wife, Sarah. There was a pause filled by the clink of wine glasses. Why is she even still alive? The laugh that followed wasn't a roar, it was worse. It was a light, airy chuckle, a little puff of amusement that dismissed my entire existence as a minor, lingering inconvenience. It was the kind of laugh you use for a silly joke, not for a person's life. I was standing just outside the wooden gate, the one David had promised to fix for 3 summers running. In my hands, I held a ceramic dish, still radiating a gentle warmth through the tea towel. It was a peach and almond crumble, David's favorite since he was a boy, the one he used to beg for on his birthday. I'd spent the morning peeling the peaches, rubbing the butter and flour into a perfect crumb with my aching knuckles, believing, as I always had, that love could be baked into something tangible, that it could be served and understood. My hands didn't tremble, not yet. A strange, cold calm washed over me, a sort of preternatural stillness before a storm. My feet, which had been so eager to carry me through that gate, were suddenly rooted to the trampled grass. I could have turned around, taken my crumble and my foolish, hopeful heart back to the quiet of my own home. No one would have even noticed my absence, but I didn't. Some new, unfamiliar instinct told me to walk forward. To see, to bear witness to the truth I had just been handed. I pushed the gate open. The squeal of the unoiled hinge was loud in the sudden silence of my own mind, but no one at the party turned their head. I walked through that backyard like a ghost moving through walls, my feet carrying me past landmarks of a life that was no longer mine. Past the rainbow-colored string lights Sarah had hung from the maple tree, their cheerful glow feeling like a mockery. Past the chattering groups of people clustered on the deck, their faces flushed with sun and wine, none of them familiar, all of them belonging more than I did. Past my own grandchildren, Lily and Leo, who were chasing each other with water guns, their shrieks of laughter a soundtrack to my own profound isolation. They ran right past me, close enough that a spray of cold water hit my ankle, but their eyes saw only their target. They didn't see their grandma. I wondered if they even recognized me without an apron on, without a tray of cookies or a bag of groceries in my hands. I was a landmark from their past, like an old tree you stop noticing. Someone finally cleared their throat. "Oh, Alina, we didn't know you were coming." It was Sarah, the same voice. She was standing by the grill with another woman, her smile a perfect, bright slash of coral lipstick that didn't touch the coldness in her eyes. It was the smile she used for photographs, tight and immaculately composed. "I brought a crumble," I said, my own voice sounding distant as if it belonged to someone else. I held the dish out slightly. No one offered to take it. Sarah's eyes flickered to it and then away, a dismissive glance that categorized it as clutter. "How nice," she said, before turning back to her friend. I stood there for a long moment, holding my cooling offering, before I finally found an empty spot at the far end of a long picnic table, away from the main cluster of guests. The folding chair groaned in protest as I lowered myself into it. My back, a constant companion of dull aches, sent a sharp complaint up my spine, but I forced myself to sit up straight, refusing to show the weight that had just been placed upon me. The air was thick with the scent of grilled meat, citronella, and Sarah's expensive perfume. The music thumping from a portable speaker was loud and fast, a frantic beat that made my teeth ache. I watched my son David move through the crowd. He was a good host, laughing easily, refilling drinks, his arms slung casually around Sarah's waist. At one point, he raised his beer bottle in a toast. "To family," he boomed, his voice full of a bonhomie that felt utterly fraudulent. "And to good friends who feel like family," glasses and bottles clinked together in a cheerful cacophony. People cheered. And in that moment, as his eyes swept across the yard, they passed right over me. There wasn't a flicker of recognition, not even the small, dutiful nod one gives to an elderly relative. It was as if I was part of the fence, a fixture in the landscape of his life he no longer needed to acknowledge. Later, Sarah drifted over, her movements fluid and practiced. She lined in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. though her smile remained rigidly in place. Did you want a plate, Alina? There's still some salad left. I looked up into her face, a face I once thought I knew, and saw only the smooth, polite mask of a stranger. I'm fine, I said. She nodded, a quick bird-like motion, already turning away before the words had fully left my mouth, her duty done. I stayed until the very end, I don't know why. Maybe I needed to see it all the way through. I helped stack the paper plates, their surfaces smeared with ketchup and grease. I folded the sticky napkins into a neat pile. I took a damp paper towel and wiped down the long table while the last of the guests moved indoors, their laughter echoing from the kitchen. David and Sarah were in there, their backs to the sliding glass door, their heads closed together. They never once looked out to see if I needed help or even to see if I was still there. Finally, when the yard was quiet and littered with the ghosts of the party, I picked up my empty ceramic dish. It was cold now. I carried it back to my car, not with anger, not with sorrow, but with the chilling, unbreakable clarity of a decision. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had erased me, and as I drove away, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was the only one who could write myself back into existence. The drive home was 5 miles of silent, automatic turns. My hands knew the way, my foot knew the pressure for the brake, but my mind was a million miles away, replaying that single, searing phrase. Why is she even still alive? Back in my own house, the quiet was a physical presence. It was no longer the peaceful solitude I had grown accustomed to. It was a roaring, cavernous emptiness, a vacuum that amplified every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall and the frantic, hollow beat of my own heart. I placed the empty crumble dish in the sink, my reflection in the dark kitchen window a wavering, insubstantial ghost. For years, I had believed that silence was the absence of noise. Now I understood it was the absence of love. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my small kitchen table, the same one where David used to sit, legs too long for the chair, painstakingly doing his algebra homework while I made dinner. Back then, his world had revolved around this room. He needed me for everything, from sharpening his pencils to explaining fractions, his forehead creased in concentration, his trust in me absolute. Now he just tolerated me, a relic from a past he had outgrown. The love I had poured into him felt like an investment that had yielded nothing but bitter returns. The house, their house, the one with the string lights and the too loud music, was mine once. Not the walls or the roof, but the foundation it was built upon. The down payment, $40,000, siphoned directly from my retirement account, a sum that had felt monumental, terrifying to release. I remembered the day I'd signed the check at the bank, my hand shaking slightly. Sarah had sat beside me, her hand resting on my arm, her touch light and cool. "This is going to change everything for us, Alina," she'd said, her voice brimming with a gratitude that I now understood was just a well-rehearsed performance. "Just to help you get started," I'd told them, my voice thick with the foolish pride of a mother who believed she was securing her son's future, and by extension, her own place within it. "No strings attached," David had said, hugging me tightly. "But you'll always have a room with us, Mom, always." That promise now lay in pieces at my feet, shattered by a single cruel question in his own backyard, a room with them. I hadn't even been granted a place at the table. That night, sleep was impossible. The past wasn't just a memory, it was a living, breathing thing in the room with me. I saw David's first steps on the rug in the living room. I heard the echo of his laughter when his father, Richard, threw him high in the air. I felt the phantom weight of him in my arms, a small, trusting body tucked against my own. Where had that boy gone? When did he become a man who could stand by and laugh while his wife questioned his mother's right to exist? At 3 in the morning, fueled by a grief that had finally hardened into resolve, I walked to the small office at the back of the house. I pulled open the stiff drawer of the old metal filing cabinet, the one Richard had bought 30 years ago. The files were neatly labeled in my own careful handwriting: mortgages, insurance, taxes. And then one labeled David House. My fingers trembled now, not with weakness, but with a cold, rising anger. Inside, I found it all: the purchase agreement, the deed, the bank statement showing the transfer from my account. And tucked at the back, the letter I'd written for the mortgage company, a formal gift letter to prove the money wasn't a loan. It was a single page typed and signed. I am gifting this money to my son, David, and his wife, Sarah, with no expectation of repayment. It is a gift of love to help them build their future. Because you're my son, I had thought as I signed it, because you are everything to me. Reading that line now felt like swallowing glass. The naive, unconditional love staring back at me from the page was more painful than the insult in the backyard. The insult was a symptom. This letter, this gift, was the disease. It was the proof of how willingly I had given away pieces of myself, believing it was the only way to keep my family close. I had been wrong. I hadn't been buying a foundation for their home. I had been paying for my own erasure. I folded the letter and put it back in the file, not with sorrow, but with the chilling certainty of a debt coming due. They might own the house, but I owned the truth. And I was finally ready to use it. The sun rose on Monday morning, casting long, pale fingers of light across my kitchen floor. I hadn't moved from the table. The folder labeled David House sat in front of me like a verdict. The woman who had signed that gift letter, so full of blind, hopeful love, was a stranger to me now. A ghost, I had spent the dark hours of the night mourning her, and as the dawn broke, I knew she had to be buried. You cannot build a future on a foundation of foolish generosity. I made coffee in my smallest pot, just 1 cup, the ritual a small anchor in a world that had come unmoored. As I sipped the hot, black liquid, a name surfaced from the deep recesses of my memory: Clara Moore. Clara was not a friend, not exactly. She was a force of nature I had encountered years ago at a short-lived bridge club I joined after Richard died. While the other women traded gossip and recipes, Clara traded stock tips and dissected legal loopholes she'd read about in the financial pages. She was sharp, bordering on abrasive, with eyes that seemed to see the architecture of a situation, not just the surface-level decor. I remembered her once telling another widow, who was complaining about her children's financial demands, "My dear, love is not a currency you can use to buy loyalty. Stop funding their comfort and start funding your own." The advice was so blunt, so devoid of sentimentality that it had shocked the room into silence. It had also, I recalled, stuck with me. Now her words echoed in my silent kitchen with the clarity of a prophecy. I found her number in my old, leather-bound address book, her name penned in my own hand from a decade ago. My heart wasn't pounding as I picked up the phone. It was beating with a slow, steady rhythm, a war drum sounding a quiet advance. I dialed the number before my lifelong habit of avoiding confrontation could talk me out of it. She answered on the second ring, her voice exactly as I remembered it, crisp, efficient, and with no time for nonsense. Clara Moore. "Clara, this is Alina Hemsworth. We knew each other from the bridge club at the community center years ago." There was a brief pause. I expected to be forgotten, to have to explain. Instead, she said, "Elena, of course. You played a very conservative game, hated to risk the bid. What can I do for you?" The observation was so startlingly accurate that it momentarily threw me. I have some questions," I stammered, feeling my resolve waver. "About property, about gifts, and legal documents." Clara didn't ask why. She didn't offer condolences for whatever trouble I was in. She just got straight to the point. "Come by my office tomorrow at 10, bring everything you have." And I mean everything, Elena. Don't edit, don't summarize, bring the paper. She gave me the address and then the line went dead. The call couldn't have lasted more than a minute, but it had irrevocably altered the course of my life. I had risked the bid. I slept that night. It wasn't the heavy, dreamless sleep of exhaustion I had known for weeks, the kind that offers no real rest. This was different. It was a profound stillness, a kind of alignment. The pain was still there, a hot cold deep in my chest, but it was no longer a wildfire consuming me. It was contained, a source of fuel. For the first time since I'd stood behind that gate, I felt a sliver of control. The world was still spinning, but I had found my footing. In the morning, I prepared for my meeting with Clara as if I were preparing for battle. I showered, the hot water a balm on my aching joints, and dressed with meticulous care. I chose a pair of charcoal gray slacks I hadn't worn in years, an ivory silk blouse, and my good coat, the navy blue one with the real mother of pearl buttons. It was too warm for a coat, but that didn't matter. When you are about to dismantle your life and rebuild it from the studs, you wear something with structure. You wear your armor. I gathered the documents from the filing cabinet, placing them in a neat stack, my movements calm and deliberate. The gift letter, the deed, the bank statements. They were no longer artifacts of my pain, they were exhibits. Evidence, I slid them into my best leather handbag, clicked the clasp shut, and looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back was still old, still tired, but her eyes held a new light, a glint of steel that hadn't been there before. She was no longer waiting, she was acting. Clara Moore's office was not an office at all, but a converted sunroom at the back of her small brick house. It smelled of lemon polish, old paper, and a faint, sharp hint of peppermint tea. There were no plush leather chairs or imposing mahogany desks. Instead, books and legal journals were stacked high on every available surface, and a sturdy oak table served as her workspace. It was the room of a woman who valued information over aesthetics, a fact that I found immensely comforting. She gestured for me to sit as she poured 2 cups of tea, her movements economical and precise. She didn't engage in small talk. "All right, Alina, let's see the damage," she said, her voice matter-of-fact as she reached for the folder I placed on the table between us. She put on a pair of severe-looking reading glasses and began to read. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the rustle of paper and the occasional small grunt of confirmation from Clara. She read every word, her expression unreadable, her focus so intense it felt like a physical force. She spent the longest time on the gift letter, reading it twice before setting it down with a decisive tap of her finger. Finally, she took off her glasses and looked at me, her gaze direct and unflinching. There was no pity in her eyes, for which I was grateful. Pity felt like a wool blanket on a hot day. What I needed was a bucket of cold water. "Well," she began, her tone leaving no room for argument. "This $40,000 is gone. It belongs to them as surely as the hair on their heads. You signed your name to a letter that explicitly states it was a gift with no expectation of repayment. Emotionally, it may have been an investment in your future. Legally, Alina, it was a bonfire, and you handed them the match." The words were brutal, but they were true. I felt a strange sense of release, the kind that comes from hearing a difficult diagnosis spoken aloud. The uncertainty was gone, I simply nodded. "I know," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Good," Clara said, leaning forward. "Mourning a bad investment is a waste of energy. They took the past, let them have it. Our job is to lock down the present and firewall the future." She pulled a yellow legal pad and a thick black fountain pen toward her. The scratch of the nib on the paper was the only sound as she wrote a single word at the top, plan. "You can't take the house back," she said, not looking up. "But you can make damn sure they don't get anything else. The question is no longer what they took from you, Alina. The question is what you have left to protect." She drew a line under the word plan and began to write, speaking as she did. "First, power of attorney, who holds it?" "David does," I admitted, the words tasting like ash, "since Richard passed." She made a note, "That's the first thing to go. A POA is for someone you trust to act in your best interest. It is not a placeholder for a son who lets his wife openly wish you were dead." Her bluntness was breathtaking. "We revoke it immediately. Second, your will. He's the executor, I assume." I nodded. "And the primary beneficiary." I nodded again. Clara drew a thick, angry line on the page. "That changes. We draft a new will. He is to be removed as executor, and if you so choose, as a beneficiary entirely." She looked at me over her glasses. "Are you prepared to do that?" "Yes," I said, the word coming out without a moment's hesitation. "Excellent," she murmured, making another note. "Third, financial accounts, bank accounts, investment portfolios, life insurance policies. He is likely listed as a beneficiary or even a cosigner on some. All of that needs to be audited and updated. His name is to be scrubbed from every last document. She continued down the page, her pen flying. A trust for the house to protect it from probate and direct its sale. An updated healthcare directive, a new living will. It was a checklist for a systematic dismantling, a step-by-step guide to surgically removing my son from the infrastructure of my life. When she was finished, she tore the sheet from the pad and slid it across the table to me. It wasn't a list of suggestions. It was a battle plan. This, she said, is how you stop being a victim and start being a proprietor of your life, of your assets, of your future. I folded the piece of paper in half and put it in my purse. A strange calm had settled over me. I felt clean. I stood up, feeling taller than I had in years. Thank you, Clara. She just nodded. Don't thank me, just do the work. Back home, the house was just as I'd left it, but everything felt different. The silence was no longer empty, it was patient. I walked to the mahogany secretary in the living room, the one that held my good stationery. I took out a single, thick, cream-colored sheet and a heavy black pen. I sat at my kitchen table, the plan lying beside me like a sacred text. Then, with a slow, deliberate hand, I wrote my son's name in the center of the page. David. I looked at the name, at the familiar loops and lines that I had taught him how to write. Then I picked up the pen, pressed the nib firmly to the paper, and drew a single, straight, unwavering line through it. It was not an act of anger. It was an act of accounting, a ledger being corrected, a debt being formally and finally closed. On Wednesday, I woke up with a desire to bake. Not for anyone, not for an occasion, but for the simple, selfish pleasure of it. For years, my baking had been an offering, a currency of affection I paid to my family. Today, it would be a ceremony for myself. I chose to make a blueberry pie, using the small, intensely flavorful wild blueberries I kept in the freezer for special occasions. I made the good crust, the all-butter recipe Richard had loved, the one that required an hour of chilling and a delicate touch, the one I usually reserved for Thanksgiving. As I worked the cold butter into the flour with my fingertips, a familiar peace settled over me. This I knew. The feel of the dough coming together, the sweet perfume of the lemon zest, the brilliant purple stain of the berries, it was a language I was fluent in. But this time, the words were for me. While the pie cooled on the rack, its golden lattice top steaming gently, I took a cup of tea out to the front porch. I settled into my old wicker chair, pulling the faded Afghan my sister Doris had made for me over my knees. The afternoon was quiet, the air warm and thick with the drone of a distant lawnmower. It was the kind of peaceful, unremarkable day where nothing of consequence happens unless you are paying very close attention. And I was, around 4 o'clock, a familiar silver sedan pulled into the driveway across the street. It was Sarah's sister, Michelle. She got out of the car carrying a canvas tote brimming with groceries and a bottle of white wine, condensation beating on the green glass. She knocked once on their front door, a perfunctory rap, and then let herself in without waiting for an answer. Comfortable. Entitled, certain of her place in their world. I hadn't been invited inside that house for nearly 4 months, not since Lily's 16th birthday party. Even then, my presence had been treated as a logistical problem to be solved. "We'll put you over here, Mom," David had said, guiding me to a small table near the overflowing recycling bins in the corner of the deck. "So you won't be too close to the music." He said it with a gentle smile, as if it were a thoughtful gesture, a kindness. I remembered sitting there, the thumping bass vibrating through the soles of my shoes, watching my granddaughter open gift after gift. I had spent a month hand-stitching a cover for a book of classic poetry, my fingers stiff and sore. Inside the cover, I'd written a long inscription. "To my dearest Lily, may you always find words for the world, and may the world always find you worthy of beautiful words. With all the love a grandma can fit on a page." She never opened it in front of me. I was told later in a brief text from Sarah that she loved it, but Lily herself never mentioned it. I'd seen her twice since then. Once at the grocery store, where she'd given me a fleeting, awkward glance in the produce aisle, like I was a substitute teacher she couldn't quite place. And still, I had kept hope. That day, watching Michelle disappear into their house, I finally understood that hope was a poison. I went back inside, leaving the perfect pie on the counter, and walked to the small table in the hallway. I pulled open the top drawer, my treasure drawer I used to call it. For years, I had filled it faithfully with small, magical things for the grandchildren, just in case they ever stopped by unexpectedly. It was a drawer full of unmet expectations. I took out a crisp new paper grocery bag and began to empty it. Every last thing went inside. The sheets of glittery star stickers, the tiny, pristine notebooks waiting for secrets, the collection of colorful gel pens, the smooth gray stone Lily had given me when she was 6, which I had been saving to give back to her in a velvet box one day. And at the very bottom, a small, sealed bag of gummy worms, now hard and stale with time. Each item was a tiny, silent testament to a love that had flowed in only one direction. I tied the top of the bag shut. I didn't feel sad. I felt nothing at all, a blessed, hollow emptiness. I carried the bag outside and placed it neatly inside the blue recycling bin by the curb. I watched it sit there for a few minutes, a lumpy, anonymous bag of discarded hope, just as invisible as I had been at their party. I went back inside, cut a large, warm slice of the blueberry pie, and ate it standing right there at the kitchen counter. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. That evening, as the sky outside my window deepened to a bruised purple, my phone buzzed on the countertop. A text message. It was from David. For a heart-stopping second, the old, foolish hope flared within me, a muscle memory I couldn't control. Maybe he'd called to truly apologize. Maybe he'd seen me at the party, isolated and alone, and felt a pang of remorse. I picked up the phone, my thumb hovering over the screen. The message read, "Mom, Sarah was saying you seemed a little off on Sunday. She's worried she might have said something to upset you. You know how she gets stressed hosting. Anyway, hope you're okay." I read the words once, then twice. I dissected them like a scholar studying a dead language. Sarah was saying, not "I noticed." He hadn't seen a thing. He was merely a stenographer, relaying a message from the person who had actually committed the crime. She's worried she might have said something. The vague, weightless language of a non-apology, designed to placate without admitting any actual wrongdoing. And the excuse, the oldest and most tired one in their arsenal, she gets stressed hosting. For years, I had collected these flimsy explanations like precious artifacts. I had wrapped them in the soft cotton of "he didn't mean it" or "she's just under a lot of pressure." I had stored them away, archives of their carelessness that I chose to interpret as love. I had built a museum of their excuses, and I had lived inside it for far too long. No more, I held my thumb down on the message. A small menu popped up. Reply, forward, delete. Without hesitation, I pressed delete. The message vanished, not archived for later review, but expunged, wiped from the record. It was a small act, but it felt like a vow. I would no longer be the curator of their casual cruelty. At 7, there was a soft knock at the door. For a foolish moment, I thought it might be him, that some sixth sense had told him his text had failed. But it was my next-door neighbor, Martha, a kind woman with a gentle stoop and eyes that had seen more than she ever spoke of. She was holding a plastic container. "Eleanor," she said softly, "I made far too much lentil soup. My daughter says I have no sense of scale." She offered the container, and I was wondering if you'd seen my cat, Vernon. He's a scoundrel for sneaking out. "I haven't," I said, "but please come in, I have pie." Martha's face lit up. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd felt so alone just hours before, and I cut 2 generous slices of the blueberry pie. She didn't ask about David. She didn't ask why my eyes looked heavier than usual or why my house felt so unnervingly still. She just took a bite of pie, closed her eyes for a moment, and let out a soft hum of pleasure. "Good heavens, Eleanor," she said, her voice full of genuine delight. "This pie is so good it makes my knees hum." We both started to laugh. It wasn't a loud laugh, but it was real, a shared warmth that spread through the quiet kitchen. I needed that laugh more than I had needed air. We talked for an hour about her renegade cat, about the outrageous price of tomatoes, about a particularly stubborn crossword clue from the Sunday paper. It was a conversation about nothing, which made it about everything. It was connection without agenda, company without expectation. It was the kind of nourishment my soul had been starving for. Later, after she had left with a promise to bring me a cutting from her prized rose bush, the house felt different. The silence was no longer a void, it was filled with the lingering echo of a shared kindness. As I walked down the hall, I paused by the small shelf that held the framed photographs. My eyes landed on one of me and David, taken at a school fair in 1987. He was 8 years old, a gap where his front tooth should be, and he was smiling at me as if I were the sun, the moon, and all the stars. As if my presence was the only thing that mattered in the whole world. I picked up the heavy silver frame, my thumb tracing the outline of his small, happy face. A single hot tear finally escaped and traced a path down my cheek. I looked at the boy in the photograph and whispered to the empty room, "I miss you, not the man, the boy." I missed the child whose love was not a negotiation. Then, with a steady hand, I turned the photograph face down on the shelf. The silver back was cool and blank, a final, closed door on a room in my heart that I could no longer afford to keep open. The next morning, I returned to Clara's sunroom office. The quiet hum of purpose from my first visit had been replaced by a palpable sense of action. Clara had the necessary documents already printed and arranged in a neat stack on her oak table. She didn't ask me if I was sure or if I'd slept on it. She treated my decision with the respect one gives to a signed contract, assuming I had read the terms and was prepared to execute them. This lack of condescension was a gift in itself. "We'll start with the power of attorney," she said, sliding the top document in front of me. "This is a full revocation. It states in unforgiving legal terms that as of the moment this is signed and notarized, David Hemsworth no longer holds any authority to make financial or legal decisions on your behalf. It effectively severs the cord. Read it." I did. It was dense with clauses and subclauses, but the intent was as clear as a freshly cleaned window. It was a declaration of independence. I picked up the heavy black pen she offered me. My hand was perfectly steady. The signature, Eleanor M. Hemsworth, was a little bolder than my usual script, the ink sharp and dark against the paper. This wasn't revenge. Clara was right. This was repair. She took the document, examined the signature, and then, with a satisfyingly loud thump, embossed it with her notary seal. The first stone in the new wall was laid. "Next," she said, her tone all business, "the will." She paused, her sharp eyes meeting mine. "You told me you wanted him removed as executor. That's simple enough. But you also indicated you might want to remove him as a beneficiary. I need to ask you again, Eleanor, because this is the one they fight about the most. Do you want to cut him out entirely?" The question hung in the quiet room. Entirely. The word was so absolute, so final. I thought of the boy with the gap-toothed smile. I thought of the young man I had proudly watched walk across his college graduation stage. And then I thought of the man who stood by and laughed while his wife questioned my very existence. The memories did not cause me pain, not anymore. They were simply facts, data points on a long and disappointing graph. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and steady. "He has a house, a job, a family. He doesn't need what I've saved over a lifetime of careful budgeting. He's already made it perfectly, painfully clear what he values, Clara, and it isn't me." Clara nodded slowly, accepting my reasoning without judgment. She opened a template on her computer, and her fingers began to fly across the keyboard. "Then his share of the estate needs a new destination. Who or what takes his place?" "I'm not sure about a new executor yet," I admitted. "A professional, perhaps, someone who won't look at me as if I'm a loose end that needs tidying up." She made a note, but I know where I want everything to go. The house, the accounts, all of it. I reached into my purse and pulled out a worn, trifold brochure I had picked up weeks ago and had been carrying ever since. I slid it across the table. It was for the Greenway Women's Shelter. Clara picked it up, her eyebrows raising slightly as she read the name. "The entire estate?" she asked, a new note of caution in her voice. That's a significant gift, Aliner. No family inheritance at all. No, I said, they have their inheritance. It's the $40,000 I no longer have in my retirement account. I took a breath, and for the first time, I shared a piece of my story I hadn't spoken aloud in 50 years. A very long time ago, before David was born, before I even met his father, I needed a place to go. A place to be safe while I figured out how to start my life over from nothing. Greenway gave me a small, clean room, a key to the door, and 3 meals a day. They never once asked me to be grateful or to hurry up and leave. They just gave me the space to breathe. Clara was silent. She looked from the brochure to the documents and then to my face. For the first time, I saw something other than professional assessment in her eyes. It was a flicker of profound understanding, of respect. She simply nodded, turned back to her computer, and began typing. "You're very clear on this," she said quietly after a moment. "I've been unclear for long enough," I replied. When all the documents were ready, I signed each one with that same deliberate hand. She notarized them, stapled them into neat packets, and handed me a copy of everything. As she walked me to the door, she placed a hand briefly on my arm. It wasn't a gesture of pity, but of solidarity. "If you change your mind about any of it, just call," she said. "I won't," I said, and we both knew it was the truth. The air outside felt sharper than before, the colors of the world more vivid. The sun was bright, but I was carrying my own weather now. I pulled my coat a little tighter, not against the cold, but as if to hug this new, solid version of myself. I was no longer a mother, a grandmother, a widow, defined by my relationships to others. I was Alina M. Hemsworth. And I was the sole proprietor of my own life. When I got home from Clara's office, the red light on my answering machine was blinking, a single, insistent eye in the dim hallway. I pressed the button. David's voice, tinny and impatient, filled the silence. "Hey, Mom, I got your voicemail about needing to find some legal stuff. Not sure what's going on. Sarah said you were acting weird last weekend. Anyway, call me, okay?" The message was a masterclass in his particular brand of oblivious condescension. My need for legal documents was a mystery to him. My state of mind was filtered through Sarah's report of my weirdness. And the final casual call me was not a request but an expectation, an instruction. For a lifetime I had obeyed, I had called back, I had smoothed things over. I had explained and reassured, always working to manage his comfort. I stood there for a long moment, then calmly reached out and deleted the message. Then I picked up my cell phone, found his contact, and with a few simple taps I blocked the number. The digital silence was immediate and absolute. Another door locked, another wall secured. The next morning, I called a locksmith. The man who arrived was young, probably not much older than 30, with kind eyes and capable hands. He was polite and efficient, replacing the locks on both the front and back doors without a single question. He worked quietly, the only sounds the whir of his drill and the click of metal mechanisms falling into place. When he was finished, he handed me a small ring with 2 shiny, newly cut brass keys. They felt solid and heavy in my palm, their sharp edges unfamiliar. They were the keys to my fortress, and I was the sole keeper of the gate. "Thank you," I said, paying him in cash. "Could you recommend a place to make copies?" After he left, I drove to the hardware store and had 4 copies made. One went on my own keyring. One was placed in the small fireproof box where I kept my most important documents. One I tucked into an envelope and walked next door to give to Martha, just in case of an emergency. The final one I put aside for my future safety deposit box. I was building a new network of security, one based not on familial obligation, but on deliberate choice and earned trust. That night, for the first time in what felt like a decade, I slept without a single dream, just deep, restorative rest. The Saturday that followed came with the soft, metallic smell of rain. Not a dramatic thunderstorm, just a gentle, persistent drizzle that settled into the edges of everything and made the world seem hushed. I pulled on my old gardening boots and went outside anyway. The flower beds along the side of the house had been neglected for weeks, a chaotic riot of weeds and overgrown perennials. The marigolds, usually so sturdy, were leaning over like tired shoulders, their bright orange heads bowed down by the weight of their own spent blooms. For too long, I had looked at this mess and felt only exhaustion. Today, I felt a flicker of purpose. I found my old gardening shears in the shed, their blades stiff with a fine layer of rust. The shears in my hand felt like an extension of the control I was slowly reclaiming. I started with the marigolds, methodically clipping off the dead heads. With each satisfying snip, I felt like I was trimming away a dead hope, making room for new growth. Then I knelt on the damp earth, ignoring the protest in my knees, and began to pull the weeds. It was slow, arduous work. There were thick, stubborn thistles with roots that seemed to go down for miles, and I thought of the deep-seated resentments I had allowed to grow for years. There were sprawling, invasive vines of bindweed that had wrapped themselves around the stems of my good peonies, choking them, and I thought of the subtle, suffocating expectations that had been placed on me. I filled a bucket, then another. My back ached and my fingernails were black with dirt, but it was a good, clean ache. It was the feeling of labor, of progress. I was not just weeding a garden. I was reclaiming my territory, one handful of dirt at a time. I was clearing the ground to plant something new. At noon, I drove to the First Mutual Credit Union. The branch was an oasis of hushed professionalism, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil of the past week. The air smelled of clean carpets and sterilized cash, and the only sounds were the low hum of computers and the polite, muted chatter of customer service voices. This was a place of numbers and rules, a place where sentiment had no currency. It was exactly where I needed to be. I walked past the line of tellers and asked to speak with a manager. A woman named Trina emerged from a glass-walled office, her demeanor brisk but not unkind. She led me to her office and gestured to a chair. "How can I help you today, Mrs. Hemsworth?" she asked, her smile pleasant and professional. "I'd like to conduct a full review of all authorized users, cosigners, and beneficiaries on all of my accounts," I said, my voice as steady as the polished desk between us. Trina's fingers flew across her keyboard, her expression neutral. She turned the monitor slightly towards me. "Okay, I see you have one cosigner on your primary checking account and one authorized cardholder on the credit account. Both are listed as David R. Hemsworth. Is that your son?" "He used to be," I replied, the words falling into the quiet room with a soft, final thud. Trina's fingers paused for a fraction of a second above the keyboard. She looked at me, a flicker of something curiosity, maybe even empathy, in her eyes before her professional mask slipped back into place. "I see," she said. "Would you like to make some changes to that access?" "I'd like to erase him," I said. The words were stronger, colder than I had intended, but they were the truest words I had spoken all day. She didn't flinch completely. "Yes, remove his access, cancel his card, reissue everything in my name only. And I'd like to set new security questions, change the online login credentials, and place a temporary hold on all wire transfers until I authorize them in person." My requests came out in a calm, orderly list. I had rehearsed them in the car on the way over. "Of course," she said and began typing. As she worked, my eyes drifted to the small plant on the corner of her desk. It was a pothos, its glossy, heart-shaped leaves trailing gracefully toward the floor. A wave of memory, so vivid it nearly took my breath away, washed over me. I used to have a plant just like it, hanging in the corner of David's nursery. I could see the room perfectly, the pale yellow walls I had painted myself, the mobile of smiling felt stars Richard had hung over the crib, the faint, sweet smell of baby powder and clean laundry. I remembered one afternoon, finding a 9-month-old David sitting on the floor beside an overturned pot, his face and hands smeared with dirt, a look of pure, unadulterated curiosity in his wide blue eyes as he tried to put a fistful of soil in his mouth. I had laughed so hard I'd had to sit down on the floor next to him, my laughter echoing in the sunny little room, a sound of pure, uncomplicated joy. The sharp click of Trina's printer pulled me back to the present. The scent of baby powder was replaced by the smell of toner and sterilized air. The warm memory dissolved, leaving a hollow ache in its place. The man I was erasing from my accounts was a stranger to the laughing baby covered in dirt. They were two different people, and I had to protect myself from the man he had become. Trina slid a series of papers across the desk for my signature. If you'd like to set up alerts for large transactions or begin the process of creating a trust for your estate, we can certainly help with that as well, she offered. Not yet, I said, signing my name on each designated line. I'm still building the next version of my life. She gave me a small, genuine smile then, one that seemed to understand far more than she let on. Well, she said, gathering the signed papers. It looks like you're building it on a very solid foundation. When I stepped out of the bank's air-conditioned chill and back into the warmth of the afternoon sun, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated or victorious. I felt clean. It was the feeling of having scrubbed away a deep, stubborn stain, of having put a disordered house back into a state of quiet, solitary order. A great weight had been lifted, and I realized it was a weight I hadn't even known I was carrying. Back at home, the feeling of clean, decisive order from the bank stayed with me. I felt a compelling need to continue the purge, to scrub away every last vestige of my old, accommodating life. I went to the hall closet, the one filled with photo boxes and holiday tablecloths, and retrieved the fireproof lockbox. Inside, among the deeds and birth certificates, I found David. I didn't destroy it, that felt needlessly dramatic. Instead, I simply separated it from my own documents, placing it in a new manila folder on which I wrote a single word: history. It was an artifact from a past life, no longer a part of my present. Then I sat down with my address book. It was an old thing with little plastic tabs from the 1990s that had yellowed with age. I flipped to the H section and stared at the entry penned in my neatest cursive: Hemsworth, David, and Sarah, Lily Leo. I took out a black pen, the same one I'd used to sign the papers at Clara's, and drew a single, precise line through each name. Then I flipped to M and wrote a new entry: More Clara, attorney. It was a quiet transfer of allegiance, from a family of obligation to a council of my own choosing. That night, the phone rang. It was an unknown number, so I let it go to the answering machine. A moment later, a familiar voice, sharp with a manufactured sweetness, filled the room. "Alina, it's Sarah. David said his credit card was declined at the gas station today. He's been trying to call you, but your phone isn't going through. To be honest, we're all getting very worried about you. Lily has been asking about her grandma. Is everything all right? Please just call us back and let us know you're okay." I stood perfectly still and listened to the message twice. The lie was so audacious, so beautifully constructed, it was almost admirable. Lily has been asking about her grandma. The words hung in the air like a puff of poisoned smoke. My birthday had been 3 weeks ago. It had come and gone with the profound silence of a forgotten anniversary. I had woken that morning with a familiar, foolish knot of hope in my stomach, waiting for a call that never came. I spent the day tidying the house, just in case they decided on a last-minute visit. By evening, the silence was deafening. I had gone into the kitchen and made myself a single cupcake in a flowered paper liner, sticking one candle in the center. The tiny, wavering flame in the empty room was a monument to my own loneliness. Later that night, I'd seen the only acknowledgement of my 72 years on this earth, a post on Sarah's social media page. It was a photo of their new golden retriever. The caption read, "Happy birthday to the best grandma, hope you're having a great one." They hadn't even used my name. They weren't worried about me, they were worried about their access, about a declined credit card. The distinction was everything. I calmly deleted the message, the lie vanishing with a simple click. Her words, meant to inspire guilt, had the opposite effect. They were a shot of adrenaline, hardening my resolve into something unbreakable. I picked up the checklist Clara had given me. My eyes fell on the next item: property title and trust. The time for quiet, symbolic acts was over. It was time to secure the fortress itself. I called the real estate attorney Clara had recommended, a man named Charles Lindell. His voice on the phone was exactly what I needed: steady, low, and calm, the kind of voice you trust before you even see the face behind it. I told him I needed to talk about title changes and creating a living trust. He gave me an appointment for Thursday without asking a single unnecessary question. After I hung up, I spent the rest of the evening preparing. I cleared off the dining room table, the one that had sat unused for years, and began to lay out my case. The deed to the house, which was in my name alone, the property tax records from the last 20 years showing every payment I had made. And then the invoices, a thick, meticulously organized folder of every major repair I had ever paid for. The new roof in 2008, $11,000. The full copper pipe replacement in 2015, $7,500. And the furnace, the high-efficiency one David had called a waste of money for an old house, but which I had paid for in full just 2 winters ago, $6,200. Every receipt was a thread in the story they wanted to forget, a testament to the fact that I had not just given them a down payment. I had maintained their inheritance for decades, while they had simply waited to collect it. When I was finished, my dining table looked like the war room of a woman no one had ever expected to fight back. On Thursday, I put on my navy cardigan, the one with the mother-of-pearl buttons that still held their iridescent shine. I arrived at Arthur Lindell's office 20 minutes early, my binder of documents held securely in my lap. His office was a world away from Clara's practical sunroom. It was a place of quiet, old-world dignity, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, worn leather chairs, and the faint, pleasant scent of wood polish and old books. It felt steady, permanent. The receptionist offered me coffee, but I declined. My hands didn't need any help shaking today, though to my surprise, they were perfectly still. Arthur Lindell himself was exactly as his voice had suggested, kind in a quiet, intelligent way, a man who listened more than he spoke. He didn't rush me, he simply sat, his hands steepled on his desk, and waited for me to begin. "I want the house to be put into a trust," I said, my voice coming out stronger than I expected. I opened my binder and laid out the deed and the tax records. "A living trust. I want to ensure that no one in my family has access to it or any claim on it. Not now and not after I'm gone." He nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the documents I'd provided. He showed no surprise, no judgment. He simply absorbed the information. "A revocable living trust is a very straightforward and effective instrument for that," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "You will be the trustee, meaning you retain full control of the property for as long as you live. You can sell it, mortgage it, do whatever you wish with it. It is still your asset. The trust simply dictates what happens to it upon your passing, avoiding probate and ensuring your wishes are followed precisely." "Good," I said. "When I pass, I want the house to be sold, everything liquidated. The full proceeds are to be donated to the Greenway Women's Shelter." He paused in his note-taking and looked at me, raising a single eyebrow. It was the only crack in his professional composure. "No family inheritance from the property?" he asked, his tone neutral, a necessary legal clarification. "No," I said firmly. He didn't push. He simply wrote it down. "I also want to ensure that my son is formally removed from any and all documents where he might be listed as a potential beneficiary by default. Bank accounts, insurance policies, healthcare proxies, all of it. I can prepare the necessary legal notices for those institutions," he said. "You'll also need to update your will to reflect these changes." "I've already begun that process with my estate lawyer," I replied. A small, knowing smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Then it seems you have all your pieces in place. We're just making the final moves official." We worked for nearly 2 hours, reviewing clauses, signing forms, assigning contingencies. He explained every line with patience and precision, ensuring I understood the power and the finality of what I was doing. When we were finished, he compiled all the signed and notarized documents into a slim, handsome binder. "This is your trust packet," he said. "Keep it somewhere safe. My office will file all the necessary paperwork with the county clerk this week. As of today, your wishes are legally protected." I thanked him and left the office with a strange sense of solidity, as if my spine had been reinforced with steel. On the way home, I did something I hadn't done in years. I stopped at the little French bakery on Main Street. The bell above the door chimed, and the smell of butter and caramelized sugar wrapped around me like a warm hug. I bought a single, perfect lemon tart and ate it right there in my car, the afternoon sun warming my knees through the windshield. Each bite was a small, private celebration. Later that evening, just as the sky was beginning to fade from blue to indigo, a familiar car pulled into my driveway. David. He stepped out slowly, his shoulders slumped, looking at the front of the house as if it were a stranger. I was sitting on the living room sofa, my new trust binder on the coffee table in front of me. I didn't move. I heard the faint, useless scrape of his old key in the new lock. A moment of confused silence and then a knock. Once, then again, louder this time. Finally, his voice, strained and uncertain, came through the thick wood of the door. "Mom, please, I don't know what's happening." I sat perfectly still, my hands resting in my lap, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. "Mom, you changed the locks. You blocked my number. I just want to talk." He sounded less angry than lost, like someone who had just realized the map he'd been following was suddenly, inexplicably blank, and he was no longer holding the pen. "Just tell me what's going on," he pleaded. I didn't answer. I just sat in the quiet of my house, a fortress of my own making, and listened to the silence that was my reply. After a long while, I heard his footsteps retreat down the porch stairs. I waited 10 minutes before I finally stood and went to the window, just in time to see his taillights disappear down the street. Then I sat back down, opened the binder to the first page, and began to read. The front yard hadn't looked this tidy in years. On Friday, I trimmed the hedges that bordered the walkway, swept the porch until it was spotless, and even replaced the cracked, yellowed bulb in the fixture above the door. It wasn't because I was expecting company. It was because I was preparing to leave, and I wanted the house to know I hadn't stopped caring. It had been a good house, solid, quiet, and steadfast. It wasn't the house's fault that the family within its walls had fractured. I'd lived here for 43 years. We moved in when David was 5, his small hand tucked firmly in mine as he'd looked up at the big front window and declared it his castle. I remembered him lining up his plastic dinosaurs along that same windowsill, giving them the names of his classmates. This one's Rebecca the T-Rex, and this one is Mrs. Fulton the Brontosaurus. That afternoon, with a notepad and pen in hand, I walked through each room not as an occupant, but as an archivist saying a final farewell. In the living room, I ran my hand over the mantelpiece Richard and I had installed ourselves one long weekend, our hands covered in stain, our laughter echoing in the empty space. In the guest room stood an old cherry wood dresser, the one I'd offered to David and Sarah when they were first starting out. "It's a bit dated, don't you think?" Sarah had said, her nose wrinkling slightly. I remembered the pride I'd felt when Richard and I bought it at an antique fair for our 10th anniversary. Dated, perhaps, but it was built to last. I saved David's old room for last. The curtains, printed with small, cheerful sailboats, still hung in the window. I'd meant to replace them years ago, but something always seemed to get in the way. The closet still held a dusty box of his old baseball cards and a shoebox on which he'd scrawled the single word, private. I had never once opened it. I sat on the edge of the twin bed, the mattress sighing under my weight, and looked out the window at the crooked apple tree in the backyard. Time had pulled it leftward, but every spring it still bloomed with a stubborn, defiant beauty. I remembered the day David, then 9 years old, had shimmied his way to the highest branch and gotten stuck, his bravado dissolving into terrified wails until I came storming out of the house, barefoot and furious, dragging the heavy wooden ladder behind me. I remembered the way he had clung to me afterward, his body shaking with leftover tears. "Don't tell anyone, Mom," he'd whispered into my shoulder. "Promise." And I never had. Standing there, I also remembered the first time he brought Sarah to this house. The way she'd looked around my kitchen, her eyes cataloging every worn countertop and outdated appliance. "It's very cozy," she'd said, and I knew even then that she meant it was small and old. I remembered holding Lily for the first time in that same kitchen, her tiny, crumpled face red with life and seeing tears in David's eyes. "She's perfect," he'd whispered, and for a moment he was my son again. Then, just as vividly, I remembered the Christmas, maybe 5 years ago, when Sarah had called ahead to say, "Please don't bring any food this year, Alina. The kids just don't eat that old-fashioned stuff. I'd baked a pumpkin pie anyway out of sheer habit. It sat on the dessert table, untouched, until my grandson Leo, then 10, poked it with a fork and announced to his friends that it tasted like soap. And they had all laughed, David too. That was the year I stopped baking for their holidays. The memories, good and bad, swirled around me, ghosts in the afternoon light. I realized then that I couldn't heal in a house this haunted. To truly start over, I had to leave the ghosts behind. I walked back to the living room, picked up my notepad, and wrote at the top of the page, moving list. Then underneath, leave the sailboat curtains, take the good quilt. That night, I sat on the porch with a blanket and the Sunday paper I'd saved. The wicker chair didn't creak under my weight. It felt familiar, steady. I thought of all the nights I'd sat here waiting for headlights in the driveway, for the sound of footsteps on the stairs, for someone to remember I existed. But not tonight. Tonight, I was waiting for nothing. I was simply sitting. I found the classified section in a small advertisement I had circled days ago. Quiet apartment complex on the edge of town. 2 rooms, ground floor, washer and dryer included. I pulled out my phone. A kind woman named Teresa answered. Yes, we still have a 1-bedroom available, she said. First floor, lots of light. It's a very peaceful community, mostly retirees and teachers. Do you allow cats? I asked. We do, she confirmed. I didn't have a cat, but I liked knowing I could. I'd like to schedule a viewing, I said, my voice clear and calm, as soon as possible. We made an appointment for the following Tuesday. I hung up the phone and looked out at the quiet street. I wasn't running away from my old life. I was walking with deliberate and steady steps toward a new one. The call came on Sunday evening as I was sitting in the living room reading a book. The phone screen lit up with an unfamiliar number. My first instinct, born of my new, cautious reality, was to ignore it, but something made me answer. Hello. A small, hesitant voice on the other end said, Grandma, is this still your number? It was Lily. Her voice was thinner than I remembered, stripped of the breezy confidence she usually wore like a second skin. It is, I said, my own voice neutral, offering no warmth, no encouragement. I would not make it easy. There was a long pause filled with the sound of her shaky breath. I found it in one of Dad's old address books from before he just had everything in his phone. He doesn't know I was looking. She rushed the words out as if afraid I would hang up. I wanted to say I'm sorry for the barbecue, for everything, really. The instinct to comfort, to say it's all right, was a powerful physical pull. It was the deepest groove in the record of my motherhood, the habit of shielding others from their own discomfort. I had evicted that instinct from my heart just last week. It was no longer welcome here. What specifically are you sorry for, Lily? I asked, my voice gentle but firm. She took a ragged breath. For not talking to you, she said, her voice cracking. For pretending not to see you at the library. For not saying thank you for my birthday book. I did love it. And I'm sorry for laughing when Mom said what she said. It wasn't funny. I don't know why I did. She trailed off, unable to articulate the reason. You just wanted to belong, I finished for her, the words tasting like old truths. Yes, she whispered, the single word heavy with relief and shame. I didn't forgive her, not then. Forgiveness is not a switch to be flipped. It is a slow, difficult thaw. But I heard the truth in her voice. It was the first truly honest thing a member of my son's family had said to me in years. Thank you for calling, I said, and I meant it. Can I see you? She asked, her voice small and hopeful. Please, just me. I thought of the treasure drawer I had emptied, of the years of one-sided affection. I thought of the angry, defensive voices of her parents. And then I thought of this one small voice breaking away from the chorus to sing its own honest song. All right, I said, making a decision that felt both risky and right. Come by tomorrow after school, but just you, Lily, do you understand? Just you. She exhaled a long, shuddering release of breath. I will, I promise, thank you, Grandma. The next day came gray and drizzly, the kind of day that makes the world feel softer, quieter. I baked a loaf of banana bread, not as a reward or a bribe, but simply to fill the house with something warm and welcoming. At 4:15, a soft, tentative knock came at the door. Lily stood on the porch, engulfed in a hoodie 2 sizes too big, her sneakers untied. Her eyes, the same blue as her father's, were wide and uncertain. "I wasn't sure you'd open the door," she said quietly. "I wasn't sure you'd knock," I replied, stepping back to let her in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place I had shared pie with Martha. Lily picked at the slice of warm bread I gave her. "Mom says you've gone crazy," she said, not unkindly, just stating a fact, "that you're cutting us all out." I poured her a glass of milk before answering. "I'm not cutting Lily," I said, looking directly at her. "I'm choosing, there's a difference." She nodded as if trying to understand the geometry of that statement. "I don't hate you," she added, her eyes welling up. "I don't hate you either," I said. I think I just copied how they acted," she confessed, her voice dropping to a whisper, "and I didn't question it until I started missing you. I missed coming over here when things were loud at home." The confession folded something tender inside me, a part I thought had been permanently calloused over. "I want to come back," she said, looking up at me, her gaze direct, "if that's allowed." I looked at this girl, this child on the cusp of womanhood, who was trying to find her own moral compass in a family that had long ago lost theirs. "You can come back," I said slowly. "But not for pie, not for gifts, not for a quiet place to hide. You can only come back for the truth. That's all I have left to offer." "I can do that," she said, and for the first time, a small, genuine smile touched her lips. She stayed for an hour. We didn't talk about her parents. We talked about her classes, a book she was reading, her dream of getting a cat. When she left, with a second slice of banana bread wrapped in foil, I watched her walk down the driveway until she turned the corner. I did not feel hopeful, not exactly. I felt honest, and for the first time in a very long time, that felt like enough. The apartment viewing was on Thursday afternoon, a day so bright and clear it felt like a promise. I woke up early and brewed coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, the way Richard used to like it. I dressed in pressed slacks and a clean blouse, not because anyone would be judging me, but because starting a new chapter of one's life deserves the dignity of clean seams. The apartment complex, Willow View, was simpler than the brochure had made it seem, but it felt right. Tidy brick buildings were surrounded by well-tended flower beds, and a sturdy-looking bench sat peacefully under a large linden tree. It felt honest. Teresa, the manager, greeted me with a warm, genuine smile, as if she already knew who I was. "Unit 1B is right this way," she said, her keys jingling cheerfully. "It gets the best of the morning sun." She unlocked the door and pushed it open. "Ground floor, south-facing windows. The neighbors are very quiet and the heat is included." The space was small, yes, but it was perfect. There was no pretense, no echo of voices that had grown cold and dismissive. There was just clean, hopeful light and pale, unmarked walls waiting for new stories to be hung upon them. I stepped into the kitchen and ran my hand over the simple laminate countertop. It wasn't marble, but it was mine, or it could be. The stove had only 4 burners, and the refrigerator hummed a faint, steady tune as if it were keeping a pleasant secret. I looked out the living room window at the small, private patio. I could put a chair out there. I could plant basil in a pot. I could exist. I turned back to Teresa, who was watching me with a patient smile. "I'll take it," I said. She blinked, momentarily surprised. "You don't want to think about it for a day or two." "I've been thinking about it for 30 years, I replied. "I'm sure." By that evening, the paperwork was signed. I sat in her small, neat office and wrote a check for the deposit and first month's rent, my handwriting steady and clear. I scheduled my move-in for the first of the month, 3 weeks. It was enough time to leave with care, not in haste. That night, I sat in my living room, surrounded by the ghosts of my old life and the promise of a new one, and felt a profound sense of peace. 2 days later, David showed up again. I heard his car before I saw it, the familiar grumble of the engine idling at the curb for a long time, as if he were rehearsing a speech behind the wheel. When he finally walked up the porch steps, I was ready. I met him at the door, but I did not open it. We stood separated by the thick, solid wood. You blocked me, he said through the door, his voice strained, a bizarre mixture of anger and confusion. You changed everything. Yes, I said calmly. Why? He demanded, his voice rising. What is this all about? Is it about money, after everything I was at the barbecue, David, I interrupted, my voice low and even, cutting through his tirade. The line went quiet. I let the silence stretch, forcing him to listen. I was standing right outside the gate, holding the crumble I made for you, and I heard Sarah ask why I was even still alive. I paused, and then I heard you laugh. It wasn't a big laugh, just a little chuckle, the kind of laugh that agrees. On the other side of the door, there was a stunned, strangled silence. Then, a frantic cascade of excuses. I didn't mean it like that. You know how she is, Mom, she just talks. It was a joke, a stupid joke. No, David, I said, my voice as cold and hard as iron. A joke has a punchline, that was just cruelty. I didn't know you were there, he finally muttered, his last pathetic defense. That, I said, is exactly the problem. You've been looking right through me for so long that you can't even see me when I'm standing right in front of you. He started to say something else, but I had heard enough. I'm not erasing you, David, I said, my voice softening just a fraction, not with pity, but with a final, devastating clarity. I'm finally choosing myself. I stepped back from the door and turned the deadbolt. The soft click was the only punctuation the conversation needed. Through the window, I saw him linger on the porch for another minute, his face a mask of disbelief, before he finally turned and walked back to his car. That night, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollowed out. I went to the kitchen, set the timer on the stove for 7 minutes, sat down at the table and cried. I cried for the boy who got stuck in the apple tree, for the man he never became, for the love that had curdled into obligation and neglect. When the timer buzzed, I stood up, washed my face with cold water, and made myself a cup of tea. Then I folded one more empty box and placed it by the door, in the pile marked keep. The doorbell rang at 10:42 a.m. sharp on Wednesday. I knew it wasn't the postman, he always came after noon. And it wasn't Martha, whose knock was soft and apologetic. No, this was a practiced, impatient summons, 2 sharp presses of the button in quick succession. I opened the door to find Sarah standing on my porch. She was dressed for a boardroom, not a midweek visit, in heels too high for the weather and a chic trench coat the color of wet bone. Her lipstick was a perfect blood-red slash, but her eyes were tight with a fury she was barely containing. Elena, she said, her voice clipped, the word not a greeting but an indictment. Sarah, I replied, my hand resting on the edge of the door. She didn't ask to come in. She simply stepped forward, forcing me to move back as she swept past me into the living room, a cloud of expensive, suffocating perfume trailing in her wake. I closed the door behind her slowly, deliberately. She stood in the center of my room, her purse clutched in front of her like a shield, and surveyed the stacked moving boxes with a look of undisguised contempt. This has gone far enough, she began, dispensing with any pretense of concern. What kind of cruel game are you playing? You've blocked David, you've emptied your accounts. He came home the other night completely wrecked, and now I hear from Lily that you're moving. You are terrorizing your own family, Elena. All of that is true, I said calmly, refusing to take the bait. She blinked, momentarily thrown by my lack of resistance. We are your family, she said, putting a strange, heavy emphasis on the word, as if it were a weapon she was unsheathing. You can't just do this to us because of one bad day. I looked at her then, truly looked at her. I saw the carefully constructed facade, the rigid posture, the way she wore her confrontation like expensive jewelry, meant to be displayed and admired, not genuinely felt. One bad day, I repeated, my voice quiet, which only seemed to unnerve her more. Was it one day, Sarah, when you sat me by the recycling bins at my own granddaughter's birthday party? Was it one day when you told me my baking wasn't good enough for your children? Was it one day when you accepted $40,000 from my retirement and then spent the next 10 years slowly and politely pushing me out of the house that money helped to buy? I took a step closer. That afternoon at the barbecue wasn't a thunderstorm, Sarah. It was just the final drop of rain in a bucket that has been full for a very, very long time. Her jaw tightened. "We never asked you for anything," she snapped. "That's the most tragic part," I replied. "You never had to ask, you just expected, you just took." She scoffed, a sharp, ugly sound. "You've always made things so dramatic, you've always been difficult." A small, cold smile touched my lips. Is that what a woman becomes when she stops saying yes? Is that what she becomes when she stops handing over her silence for free? Difficult. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She was losing control of the narrative, and it infuriated her. Her eyes landed on Lily's name. "And you're using your granddaughter to prove some point. You're poisoning her against her own parents. She's confused, she's hurt." "Lily came to me on her own," I said, my voice sharp for the first time. "She is 16 years old, not 6. She is old enough to recognize cruelty when she sees it, and she was brave enough to apologize for her part in it. You should try it sometime." That silenced her. She paced the length of the room, her heels clicking an angry rhythm on the hardwood floor. "So you're really doing it," she said, gesturing at the boxes again. "You're going to go live in some sad little apartment all by yourself. And what happens then, when you're alone and you fall, when no one's left to check on you, when Lily forgets to call?" "I will still have myself," I said, the words clear and certain. "And I would rather be alone with my own honesty than surrounded by people who require my invisibility." She looked around the room one last time, as if the walls might rush to her defense. "You're throwing everything away," she said, a final, desperate judgment. "No," I said, picking up the slim binder containing my trust documents from the coffee table. I held it up slightly. "I'm finally choosing what to keep." She stared at the binder, then at my face. She saw no weakness there, no opening for another attack. The fight was over. She picked up her purse, walked to the door, and turned. "Don't expect us to come running when you change your mind." "I'm not running," I said quietly to the closed door, "and I won't." Later that evening, my phone lit up with a text from Lily. She came home fuming, said, "You were hostile, you okay?" I typed back a single perfect word, "Perfectly." A moment later, I added, "Some doors need closing, Lily. It doesn't mean you're on the other side of them." A heart emoji appeared, followed by a new message. "Still bringing cookies Thursday. Don't bail." I smiled. I wouldn't. The papers were ready. Clara called on Thursday morning, her voice as crisp and satisfying as a new $100 bill. "It's all done, Alina. Everything's been signed, filed, and confirmed. The trust is active and recorded with the county. The revocation of the power of attorney is officially on file. Your new will has been witnessed and sealed. As of this moment, you are the sole and undisputed decision maker of every inch of your life." "Thank you, Clara," I said, the two small words feeling utterly inadequate to convey the mountain of gratitude I felt. "Don't thank me," she said, but there was a warmth in her voice now that hadn't been there during our first call. "I'm proud of you, Alina." I smiled into the phone. "Funny," I said, "how many people start saying that, but only after you learn how to say no." By noon, I was at the bank, my binder of new documents in hand. I wasn't there to make changes this time, but to deliver the final official notices for their records, a copy of the trust, the POA revocation, and the updated list of beneficiaries. The clerk who helped me was a young woman, barely 25, but she handled the legal papers with a quiet reverence as if they were something sacred. I liked that. "We'll get these scanned and attached to your profile right away, Mrs. Hemsworth," she said, her voice a model of calm efficiency that I now understood was not coldness but competence, just like me. Afterward, I walked 2 blocks to the post office. The air was cool, and I felt a lightness in my step I hadn't felt in years. I filled out a small card and paid for a new P.O. box. When the man behind the counter asked if I wanted to fill out a forwarding address form for my old residence, I smiled. "No, thank you," I said. "That won't be necessary. Anyone who truly needed to find me already knew where I was going." I got back just in time for Lily's arrival at 3:30. She had a plastic container of still warm chocolate chip cookies in one hand and a magazine in the other. It has a quiz on what type of flower you are, she announced, grinning. We sat on the porch steps, surrounded by a few neatly taped boxes, and ate the cookies while we circled answers in pencil. I apparently was a lilac, quiet, observant, and easily underestimated. Lily was a marigold, resilient and hard to root out. That checks out, she said with a laugh, reading her result aloud. When the cookies were gone, we just sat for a while, the comfortable silence a testament to our new, fragile bond. Dad says you're turning your back on the family, she said quietly, not as an accusation, but as a report from a foreign land. I looked out at the street, at the familiar houses and the old oak tree on the corner. No, Lily, I said, I'm turning towards myself. For a very long time, I was taught to believe that was the same as turning my back on everyone else. I was wrong. She nodded, absorbing that. Then she pulled a folded piece of paper from her school bag. It's just a sketch, she said, suddenly shy. I made it last night. I don't know if it's any good. I unfolded the paper carefully. It was a pencil drawing, rough in places but incredibly clear in its intent. It showed a woman, an older woman with her hair in a bun, seated at a chessboard. Her back was straight, her gaze fixed forward. In front of her, the opposing side had a full army of pieces. King, queen, rooks, pawns, all crowded together. On her side of the board, there were only 3 pieces left: a single, powerful queen, a knight, and 1 rook. But they were in a winning position, a checkmate in 2 moves that the other side hadn't yet seen. She's not losing, Lily said softly, as if explaining it to herself as much as to me. Everyone thinks she is because she doesn't have as much, but she's just starting to play her own game. I couldn't speak. A profound, aching wave of emotion washed over me. It wasn't sadness. It was the overwhelming feeling of being, for the first time, truly and completely seen. I reached out and squeezed her hand, my throat too tight for words. Can I hang this in the new apartment? I finally managed to ask, right by the window. Her whole face lit up. Really, you'd want to. Really, I said. After she left, I sat alone on the porch for a long time, the drawing resting in my lap, the house quiet around me. All the paperwork was signed. All the confrontations were over. All the decisions were made. There were no more permissions to seek, no more hollow invitations to hope for. It was done, not bitterly, but firmly. Tomorrow I would begin packing the final boxes. And after that would come something far better and more reliable than hope: space. Moving day arrived without ceremony on a quiet Tuesday under a soft, milky sky. I woke before the dawn, not from a sense of anxiety, but from a deep, internal clock that knew it was time. I made coffee in the same chipped mug I'd used for over 20 years and stood barefoot in the kitchen one last time, the cool linoleum a familiar comfort under my soles. The early light hadn't yet reached the windows, but I didn't need it. I knew every inch of this house in the dark. I knew the floorboard that creaked by the pantry and the spot on the counter that was permanently stained from a bottle of beet juice I'd dropped a decade ago. It was a house that held the complete and unabridged history of my life. The movers, 2 polite young men, arrived at 9 o'clock sharp. They were fast and efficient, a little surprised by how few boxes I had. I'd been ruthless in my sorting. Every item I chose to keep had to earn its place in my new, smaller life. The boxes were all clearly labeled: kitchen keep, closet donate, bedroom memories, and one smaller box marked do not open yet. They didn't ask questions, they just worked. By noon, the house was a hollow, echoing shell. The walls looked tired, marked with the faint ghosts of picture frames and the brighter squares where furniture had stood for decades, protecting the paint from the sun. The rooms, stripped of their purpose, seemed to exhale a long, slow sigh of relief. I walked through each one slowly, my footsteps echoing in a way I'd never heard before. My fingers grazed the surfaces one last time, not to cling, but to thank. In the hallway, I paused where David's childhood height marks used to be. They were long painted over, but if I pressed my fingers lightly against the wall, I could still feel the faint indentations under the layers of paint. 5 years old, 7, 11, a lifetime of inches that could not be undone, only covered over. I didn't cry, the time for that was over. I went to the empty hallway table and placed a small envelope in the top drawer. It held one of the new front door keys and a note written on my best stationery. It simply read, "This house taught me everything. Thank you." Then I walked out the front door, locked it behind me, and did not look back. The apartment smelled of fresh paint and possibility. The movers placed the boxes exactly where I asked, and I tipped them far too much, feeling a surge of reckless generosity. I didn't care. After they left, Teresa from the office knocked on the door, holding a small welcome gift. "Something green," she said with a warm smile, "for your windowsill." It was a tiny succulent in a ceramic pot shaped like a sleeping cat. I placed it on the counter beside the kitchen sink and whispered, "I think we'll get along just fine." The first thing I unpacked was the kettle, because a new home doesn't feel real until you can make a cup of tea. The second was Lily's drawing. I didn't just set it on a counter. I found a nail left by the previous tenant and hung it on the wall next to the large window, where the soft afternoon light caught it perfectly. The pencil lines seemed to glow, the lone queen on the board a silent, steadfast guardian of my new domain. That night, I made toast for dinner and ate it on the small balcony, wrapped in the old Afghan Doris had made for me. There was no noise from a family that wasn't speaking to me, just the rustle of the wind in the linden tree and the occasional muted hum of someone else's television through the wall. I didn't feel lost or lonely, I felt spacious. The next morning, I unpacked the final box, the one marked "Do Not Open Yet." Inside were the true essentials: two good dresses, a pair of comfortable shoes, a small tin of buttons I'd collected over decades, and a letter folded in thirds, the paper slightly yellowed at the edges. It was Richard's handwriting, the letter he had written me the night before his final surgery, the one he didn't survive. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. "Ellie," it read, "if something goes wrong tomorrow, don't fold in on yourself, don't lock the doors. Stay open, stay warm, live with your hands unclenched. You have more strength than you know." I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer of my new nightstand. It was the first thing I put in there. He had known all those years ago. He had seen the strength in me I was only just now beginning to find. The first thing I did in the new apartment after hanging Lily's drawing was bake. I made banana bread, the scent of cinnamon and warm sugar filling the small space, chasing the smell of fresh paint out the open windows. It was no longer a gesture of defiance or a solitary comfort. It was a housewarming, an act of consecration. I was anointing these new, unfamiliar walls with the scent of home. As it baked, the whole apartment filled with a smell so familiar, so deeply comforting, I closed my eyes and smiled. I was no longer a guest in my own life. At 4 o'clock, Lily arrived, her cheeks flushed from the cool autumn air. She'd ridden the old, rusty bicycle over from her grandfather's house, and she proudly locked it to the railing of my small patio. "I brought jam," she announced, holding up a small, fancy jar. "Fig and cardamom, I thought it sounded like you." I was touched by the specificity of it, by the idea that she saw me as a person with unique tastes, not just a generic grandmother. We sat at the little table by the window, the one that got the best of the afternoon sun, and ate thick slices of the warm bread with her jam. She spread it carefully to the edges, then looked up at me, a smear of it on her cheek. "Is this what peace feels like?" she asked, her voice full of a 16-year-old's earnest curiosity. I looked around the small, quiet room, at the sunlight pooling on the floor, at my granddaughter's happy face. "Not all of it," I said, "but a corner of it, yes." She ate with both hands like she used to when she was small, crumbs trailing across her napkin. She told me about her English teacher who said 34 times in a single lecture, and about how her mother, Sarah, was furious with me for turning down a perfunctory dinner invitation. "She said you were making a spectacle of yourself," Lily reported, rolling her eyes. "I'm not making anything," I said simply. "I'm simply not showing up where I'm not wanted." "I told her I wanted to come see you anyway," Lily continued, "and she said she couldn't stop me, but she certainly wouldn't drive me." She grinned, gesturing toward the patio with her thumb. "So I borrowed Grandpa's bike. It's in bad shape, but it got me here." That made me smile, a real, deep smile. Richard would have loved that. You can leave it here, I said. We'll fix it up together. We can get some tools this weekend. Her eyes lit up with a genuine, unforced joy. Really, she asked. Really, I promised. 1 week after the move, the house sold. Arthur, my lawyer, called to say an offer had come in just above the asking price. An older couple, he said, no kids. They fell in love with the garden, looking for quiet and a bit of history. I almost laughed. They would find both in abundance. I didn't go back, not for the final walkthrough, not for the closing. I had already said my goodbyes. I signed what needed signing at Arthur's office and let it go. He called when it was official. The funds have been transferred, Alina, it's done. I thanked him, hung up the phone, and stood for a moment in the middle of my small living room. It wasn't a large space, but every single inch of it was mine. The next day, I walked to the bank and had a certified check drawn up for the full amount of the sale. Then, I walked the 6 blocks to Greenway Avenue. The women's shelter was in an unassuming brick building, the kind you could pass 1,000 times and never notice. It was a place designed for quiet refuge, not for drawing attention. I walked inside. The director, a woman with tired, kind eyes and a warm, weary smile, greeted me in a small, cluttered office. I didn't waste her time with a long story. I simply handed her the check. She took it, her eyes scanning the memo line. Then she looked at the amount, and her face went slack with disbelief. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked up at me, her mouth opening and closing silently. I don't understand, she finally stammered, staring at the number of zeros. This is more than our entire operating budget for the year. I just nodded. This is for the women who leave without shoes, I said softly. It's for the ones who need a door with a key, a hot meal, and a place to breathe. She started to cry then, real, soundless tears of overwhelming relief. I didn't. I had done my crying. This wasn't grief. This wasn't even charity. This was intention. This was turning the rubble of my old life into the foundation for someone else's. That night I made soup, just for me. A simple leek and potato soup, not from a recipe, but from memory. I didn't set the table. I ate standing by the stove, my apartment filled with the quiet, intricate sounds of a saxophone playing on the jazz station I'd found on the radio. There were no ads, just soft rhythms that didn't demand applause. The food was nourishing, the silence was restful, and the solitude was a choice. I was not lonely, I was at peace. At around 8:30, the buzzer from my apartment rang, a sharp, unfamiliar sound that startled me. I didn't expect anyone. I pressed the talk button. Hello. Grandma, it's me. Can I come up? It was Lily. Of course, I said, pressing the button to unlock the lobby door. A minute later, she was standing in my doorway, wearing an oversized sweatshirt with the sleeves pulled down over her hands and clutching a shoebox. Her eyes were a little red-rimmed. What's in the box? I asked gently, taking in her fragile state. Stuff I'm not ready to keep at home anymore, she said, her voice small. She came inside and sat cross-legged on my living room floor, opening the box as if it were a treasure chest. Inside was a worn notebook, a phone charger, a silver necklace with a tiny crescent moon that I knew was not Sarah's taste, and a faded photograph. It was a picture of the two of us at the zoo when she was 5 years old. She had a smear of chocolate ice cream on her face, and she was holding my hand so tightly her knuckles were white. I had forgotten that day, she hadn't. There was a fight, she said suddenly, not looking at me. About you, about the house being sold. Dad was yelling, Mom was crying, it was ugly. She finally looked up at me, her young face etched with a weariness that didn't belong there. I don't want to live there when I'm older, with them like that. I sat down on the floor across from her. You won't have to, I said quietly. You get to choose who you become, Lily, and you get to choose where you belong. Even if they hate me for it, she whispered, the question hanging in the air between us. Especially then, I said. She nodded, a slow, thoughtful motion, as if she were filing that permission away in a safe place in her heart. She stayed until nearly 10, and we didn't talk about her parents again. Some threads are best left untangled. When she left, she hugged me with a strength and certainty that hadn't been there before. A few days later, a letter came. There was no return address on the plain white envelope, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was David's. I opened it slowly with no sense of hope or dread, only a quiet curiosity. Mom, it begins. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know if you even want me to. I said things I can't unsay. I let things happen that I should have stopped. I know that now. I don't know how to be the man you deserve, and I'm scared it's too late to learn. But Lily talks about you every day now. She's different since she started seeing you again. Braver, happier. And I know that came from you. You're giving her something that I couldn't. I'm sorry for everything, for laughing, for not seeing you. I hope one day you'll let me try to earn my way back, not to your will or your bank accounts, just back. David. I folded the letter neatly along its original creases. The woman I used to be would have wept with relief, would have called him immediately, her heart overflowing with a forgiveness he hadn't truly earned yet. The woman I had been a few weeks ago might have ripped it into 1,000 pieces, a final act of angry defiance. But the woman I was now simply held it in her hand for a long moment, acknowledging the flicker of sincerity in the words, the painful honesty of his fear. His journey to become a better man was his own. It was not my responsibility to manage, nor was it my place to reward its first, tentative steps. I walked to my bedroom and opened the nightstand drawer where I kept Richard's letter. I placed David's apology inside, alongside it. It was not forgiveness, it was not refusal, it was simply a space for it to rest undisturbed. I was no longer a character in his story, reacting to his actions. I was the author of my own, and the next chapter was waiting to be written. The day I turned 73, I woke up without an alarm. The morning was quiet, the only sounds the soft patter of rain against the window pane and the gentle hum of the refrigerator. There were no balloons, no surprise texts from relatives who remembered me once a year out of digital obligation. There was just the clean, pale light of a new day, filtering through curtains I had chosen in a home that belonged completely to me. I made myself pancakes, 2 of them, and ate them with honey and a sliced pear, sitting at my small table. I propped the framed photograph of Richard on the chair across from me. Well, I said to his smiling face, we got here, didn't we? At noon, Lily arrived. She brought a bouquet of bright red tulips, still wrapped in the crinkly paper sleeve from the florist. You're not a birthday cake person, she said, her smile wide and genuine, so I brought you flowers like grown-ups do. She handed me a small, handmade envelope. Inside was a card she had painted herself. On the front was a simple watercolor image, 2 chairs on a small balcony. One was empty, but on its armrest sat a steaming cup of tea, as if waiting for a guest. Inside, she had written, "Thanks for keeping a seat for me." We had tea and toast and talked about her final exams, about her plans to volunteer at the Greenway shelter over the summer, and about how she was trying to convince her school principal to let her start a support group for kids who didn't always feel like home was home. She was building her own tables now, too. Before she left, she tilted her head, studying my face with an artist's intensity. You look different, she said. I feel different, I replied. No, it's more than that, she insisted, narrowing her eyes thoughtfully. You look like someone who doesn't flinch anymore. After she was gone, I sat on my balcony with a book I'd been meaning to read for 15 years. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled clean and new. A text message lit up my phone's screen. It was from David. Happy birthday, Mom. I didn't send a card. I figured I haven't earned that yet. Just wanted you to know I'm still here. I read the message. I didn't feel a surge of anger or a pang of sadness or even a flicker of hope. I just felt quiet. I put the phone down on the table beside me. Not every apology requires a reply. Some simply need to land softly in the space where harm was once ignored, a quiet acknowledgement that the message was, at long last, received. That evening, I invited Martha and Ida over. We drank tea, and they brought a cherry pie from the bakery down the street. We laughed about our aching knees and the absurdities of politics. They told me about their grandchildren, and I told them about the stubborn old bicycle on my patio that Lily and I were going to fix. There was no performance, no tension, no carefully chosen words. There was only the easy, comfortable noise of a friendship that demanded nothing but presence. After they left, I stood in my doorway for a moment, listening, not to the silence, but to the gentle, lingering hum of a house that had been filled, finally, with the right kind of love. That night, before I turned out the light, I took out my journal and opened it to a fresh page. It was the last page in the volume. I wrote slowly, my hand steady, the words coming with a clarity that had taken a lifetime to earn. They asked why I was still alive. Now I know the answer. To remember my name. To set my own table. To keep the door open just wide enough for those who knock with clean hands.